everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Robert, Diana.
And unfortunately, our other fabulous co-host was here, or is here in spirit, but unfortunately had to leave due to terrible illness and a worry that a nasty cough was going to come up on the audio recording. So Jackie McDonald is here in spirit and did give us some questions she wants to make sure that we cover on today's exciting topic. But that's enough about talking about various illnesses of your hosts. Let me tell you about the show itself. If you're a new listener, you should know that ABA Inside Track is a podcast in which we talk about behavior analysis and behavior analytic literature. And this week, we're going to be covering a very exciting topic, which is one that I think that, you know, the time for, this is definitely, the time is now, wouldn't you say, Diana?
'Tis.
The time has always been now, but it definitely is now in these sort of, I guess, tumultuous historical times, or we'll see if they.
You know what word I've been enjoying lately?
What?
Fraught.
Fraught?
Fraught.
These times that are fraught with.
Fraught.
With. You're usually fraught with something, aren't you?
No.
No? These times are fraught?
They're just fraught times.
Oh, that doesn't sound right to me. But okay, sure.
Fine.
No, I'm just
Rob?
Okay, fine. Well, in these fraught times, we're going to be talking about cultural competence. Because we're good behavior analysts and we like to know what we know, but also know what we don't know, we fortunately have a very special extra co-host guest who will be joining us to talk about cultural competence. And that is Dr. Solandy Forte of Milestones Behavioral Health down in Connecticut, one of our other New England states. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is a real pleasure, because this is an area that I think is very important. It's always been very important, but I think now more than ever, it's known kind of how important our cultural competence is, not just as, well, you might need to know this if your population is X, Y, and Z, but more as there are general steps that I think it's good for all of us, no matter how sort of homogenous the group of our clientele is, to have a sense of what would we do or what should we be doing to always be looking to increase our cultural competence. So it's really, really great to have you here.
Absolutely.
So we'll be talking about 3 articles, though, as you told us off air, Solandy, you really just kind of want to use these as starting points. So for listeners, we hope that they've had a chance to read all these articles, because we're not just going to be doing a sort of point-by-point review of them. And these 3 were articles that you recommended us to check out. So they are Ethical Issues in Rural Programs for Behavior Analysis for Students with Disabilities by Young-Pelton and Dotson. And that is from... was Rural Special Education Quarterly 2017. Not a journal I'm very familiar with. Developing the Cultural Awareness Skills of Behavior Analysts by Fong.
Just Fong.
Oh, it's just Fong, sorry. Catagnus, Brodhead, Quigley, and Field from Behavior Analysis and Practice 2016. And Multicultural Alliance of Behavior Analysis, Standards for Cultural Competence in Behavior Analysis by Fong and Tanaka, and that's from the International Journal of Behavioral Consultation and Therapy, 2013.
I know that we had talked a little bit about what we were going to be talking about, the articles, but also I think that what's important for the audience to know is also personal experience really plays a big role in knowing what you're going to do when you're faced with some of these cultural barriers, right? Because they don't necessarily just have to do with understanding the culture and sort of the practices of the culture and, you know, the oppression or the social dynamics or the history of the culture, but it's also understanding or really knowing and accepting, right, where you are as an individual and as a professional with sort of your awareness. Where am I with understanding these cultural barriers? Where am I with understanding, you know, what I need to put in place to navigate through these language barriers? And also, what do I need to know in order to address the discrepancies with really defining client and clinician relationship? Because it can get really super complicated, right? Especially, for example, you know, I'm a Latina woman, right? And I come from a Hispanic culture that is very strong with regard to, you know, how different individuals in our family play a role in decision making, right? So I know that if I'm going to, go and take on a new job in a new place, I need to talk to my abuelita about it.
Right.
So if you think about like families and children with that are either going for an assessment or somebody's talking to them about a treatment, option, and they're newly diagnosed, you have to sort of be aware and be patient and know what the decision-making process is for these families. Mm-hmm. So by way of background, if I can just quickly sort of introduce myself.
Yes, please.
So I am Hispanic, right? I'm proud Colombian. And I've worked with families who Spanish is their primary language. Mm-hmm. When I went into the field of applied behavior analysis, I didn't know how I was going to be helping my community, right? But I ended up, I think my background's a little unique because I am I'm a licensed clinical social worker, so I have my master's in social work. Mm-hmm. And I'm also a behavior analyst. So I think that that combination gave me the opportunity to work with families, foster families, who's, the children and the foster parents were very diverse, right? And culture and ethnic background and languages. So what I took from that position helped me sort of mold who I am as a professional in dealing with some of these situations. Mm-hmm. So anyways, that's just a little bit about my background. So you know where sometimes my stories are coming from, which are like real life examples. Something that I do want to point out in the Fong Tanaka article, the 2013 article, they have a quote: everyone has a culture and every community has a subculture. And this happens with all of us. It doesn't matter what ethnic background you are. It doesn't matter, what your upbringing. Everyone is part of a culture, and every community has a subculture. And this subculture really speaks to your own history, how you interact with people, how they've been oppressed. And also it talks about power and sort of privilege. Mm-hmm. So power and privilege really speaks to the problem of the disparities, right? With families with multiple cultural backgrounds and them having difficulty receiving services, whether it's assessment and treatment or opportunities really to learn about, a child's diagnosis, let's say, right? Mm-hmm. With autism. Let's say a child diagnosed with autism. They don't have the same opportunities, right? Because of their community and what their culture was and what was available or is available to them. But those are things that we have to learn how to navigate and make sure that we're connecting ourselves with the community and with the resources that we have within our community. That's the only way that we're able to then connect and build a positive, really, relationship with your client and their family system. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because there are a few things that Fong, the 2017 Fong, Ficklin, and Lee bring up as things that we should be aware of, right? So we want to make sure that the first thing we think about is raising self-awareness, right? We want to be aware of our own cultural identity.
Right.
We want to know what our beliefs are. We want to know what our values are. We want to know what our preferences are, some of the characteristics and circumstances, right, of our beliefs, our culture. Because if we're not aware of that, we're not going to know how that's going to impact the people that we serve, mm-hmm. right, from different cultures. Because if we're not aware of that, we're not going to be able to say, wait a second, here's how I'm thinking, here's something I'm believing, here's how I feel like I need to treat this problem. And if I'm not aware of how that's going to impact the client that I'm serving, then I'm doing a disservice, right? Because I'm potentially imposing my beliefs on them.
Absolutely.
Okay. So those are things that we have to, I think we're really obligated to, right? To make sure that we have and we put in check.
Oh, so step one is know thyself, really is that first piece.
Yep. And recognizing the culture that you're bringing to the situation, because the Fong and Tanaka
article said, no one is free of culture. Everyone is coming to a situation with their own background and experiences and judgments related to what they see as sort of what the normative culture would be. But just because you're part of the majority culture doesn't mean that that's the only culture around.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of other equally valid viewpoints that need to be considered.
I know in reading these articles and in really, putting some real, thought behind what is cultural competence, it's funny how much I always thought of cultural competence as not so much a understanding of myself, my culture, my experiences, therefore how might I perceive other cultures or what might I need to learn about other cultures, so much as my culture is the norm as far as I'm concerned. Therefore, cultural competence must mean learning about everybody else. Like everyone else is the other, and I'm sort of the norm. And it's sort of so weird to think about that. I feel like, this week was probably the first time I said, wait a minute, no. If I think about it that way, I'm going in the opposite direction of cultural competence. I'm just doing more of the same of, no, what I'm doing, even if I don't mean it to be like I'm the right culture or the normal culture, that's what I'm doing. It's not a process of understanding myself and what that might mean and how my culture relates to other cultures so much as this is what I do, therefore this is how it should be, and I better learn other people so sometimes I can change what I'm doing a little bit just to be nice. And that's not really what, I mean, being nice is nice, but it's not really what cultural competence is all about.
Exactly. Exactly. And the other thing is that to be culturally competent does not necessarily mean that we have to learn every specific nuance, right, of a culture. Mm-hmm. But we have to be in a place that we're displaying or we're showing cultural humility, mm-hmm. right? So you don't have to necessarily achieve a state of knowledge, right? Oh, okay, I know about this culture. I know everything that there is about this culture because I've worked with 3 families just like this. And, yeah. If they offer the spinach from their backyard, you gotta just take it. No. It's not just about that. It's cultural humility. Don't say, I got you. I know exactly what you're saying. Instead, listen. Mm-hmm. Admit that you don't know, right? Admit that you don't know. And for God's sakes, ask questions, mm-hmm. because that's how you're showing them that you want to learn, but you also are learning so that it informs your assessment and treatment, mm-hmm. right? Because they're part of this as well. And you telling me how you feel about this or, what your thoughts are around, your opinion is around, what I've just said, I'm going to do this functional behavior assessment and I'm going to implement a differential reinforcement system, but I'm not saying that, right? I'm saying I'm going to, teach your child how to request and I'm going to use a reinforcement. You may want their opinion on that. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. And you may want to know and ask questions around, how do you feel about it? Right. How would your mom respond if I asked her to toilet train a certain way? Because, mm-hmm. You're going to be working, but your mom's going to be home caring because she's flown from India and she's going to be here for the next 3 months. Right. Mm-hmm. So how does she feel about this? How on board is she with what we're having discussion? And does she do it differently? Right. Because that needs to inform then again, my treatment plan.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And even the way I think that we ask those types of questions needs to be considered, right? Because if you're just the behavior analyst, it's just blowing in there and assuming right off the bat that toilet training is everyone's number one priority without stopping to ask those questions, right? Or how the family feels about tackling something like that, then even if you're asking them to prioritize, if it's clear what your priority is, and if that doesn't match, then some families may or may not bring that up to you.
Right. They're not going to bring it up to you. If it does not match, then we have failed then mm-hmm. to focus on what I usually say is the number one thing to do, which is develop and really promote a healthy relationship between you and the client and the family. Right. So cultural competence, just to go back to what you were saying also, is not just knowing. Cultural competence is really the root, right, in which the relationship between the behavior analyst and the client, the work that you're doing to understand their beliefs and how they feel about certain recommendations that you're making. And really, when we're looking at raising self-awareness, we're looking at really improving. If you think about it, if I'm focused on being self-aware, I'm also then focused on improving the quality and effectiveness of the behavioral service delivery that I'm offering, right? I'm also preventing maybe some biased perceptions or disregard for others' beliefs and values and preferences. I mean, I want to make sure that I'm listening to all that. Mm-hmm. So if I'm raising some self-awareness, I'm going to also be paying attention to those other components as well. The BACB, just to throw in something that the BACB says, because they say that this is important, right? Mm-hmm. They say that it's really important for us to reach out. So what does the BACB say? They say importance is given to understanding the context of the behavior and the behavior's value to the individual, the family, and the community. The BACB is telling us right there, that's our responsibility. It's the understanding of the context of the behavior and the behavior's value to the individual, the family, and the community. So if I'm not asking those questions, right? If I'm not exploring what their needs are, if I'm not being open-minded to some of their practicing, then I'm not really focused on the value that this will have on the individual, the family, and the community.
Yeah.
So
I do love that about behavior analysis, right? We have this wonderful science that we can use to make changes to behavior. But at the end of the day, it's applied behavior analysis.
Right.
So if the changes that we're putting into place are not socially significant to the individual and the relevant parties, then we haven't done our job. So it's like we have to take these really objective measures and then ultimately look at them in a more subjective way to determine if they're socially valid. And I love that there's like that kind of hard and soft juxtaposition of our field. And this is right at the core of what that really means, right? So like we could make a change to behavior, but if it wasn't the behavior that was important, or we didn't make a change in the way that the family saw fit, then we haven't done our job. And we need to be sensitive to that from the very first time we meet a family when we're thinking about what are going to be the proper goals and objectives to put into place.
Yeah. The story about the spinach is a true story. I am offered more food than you can imagine when I go into some of these homes.
Yeah.
And you know how we're not supposed to accept gifts and all that. I'm like, if I don't accept this spinach, they're not going to work with me, and I might as well not accept this job.
I think you have a valid point. Yeah.
I mean, it's a moment where you have to really think of what is my job here? Yep. My job here is to make a difference, to have an impact. And I need to really be sensitive to their offering. And I need to consider that very carefully.
I completely agree with you. on that point, because I've worked in a lot of different homes with families with a variety of different backgrounds, and that's like the one point where I think when you first meet a family and they're trying to establish that relationship with you, and in many cultures that's the way that they're trying to do that, right, is to just offer you some small thing. So trying to find the balance there of what our ethical code states and establishing and or maintaining the rapport with the family is a really fine line to walk, and one that I think we should be careful in our consideration of.
Yeah. So I've had in the Hispanic culture, the women, when something, if they're religious, right, everything is like they pray to Virgin Mary, Virgencita. Right? And anytime that I'm working with a Hispanic family and religion is something big and to them, I take that into consideration because they're going to be, anytime I make a recommendation, it's going to be followed by, if, I'm going to pray to Virgin Mary and I'm going to, not me, they tell me I'm going to pray to Virgin Mary and I'm going to help and pray that the Virgencita helps me with carrying out this treatment, this thing that you're telling me to do. And I follow with saying to them, yes.
Sure.
Because I need her to help you.
Right?
Get them up in the middle of the night because we're doing toilet training, right?
Yeah.
So it is something that I say to them, sure, absolutely. And you do that.
Right.
because I need him to respond with reinforcement. I need you to redirect him and not attend to that behavior. I need you to If the Virgin Mary is going to help you do that, sure, go ahead. I'm there with you.
I hate to interrupt a conversation when it's going so well, but I do want to make sure that all of our listeners who are interested in applying for CEs know that, hey, guess what? ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. So if you're interested in getting CEs for listening to this episode, all you need to do is go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, click Get CEUs, enter some information, as well as 2 secret code words spread throughout the episode. We're going to give you the first one right now. It is penguin. Penguin. Penguin, the creature. There's the South American penguin and Antarctic penguin. I think those are the only 2 penguins I know.
Arctic chinstrap emperor gentoo.
Oh, someone's been watching some Atypical. Yes, the penguin.
You know, another piece that I talk about that's I feel is critical, and I think we need to do so much more of it, is education and training around this topic, because I don't think we do enough of it. I really don't.
Oh, no. I think our field is just in the very beginning stages of consideration of this topic. We have a lot more work to do.
Yeah, tons. It's interesting because I was talking to a colleague about this, and I told her I wanted to submit a talk that, said shut up and listen, because sometimes we really, when we go into working with families, we really need to stop, listen, and just, shut your mouth, and just listen to what they're saying, because you're going to give them that opportunity to talk. And really, that comes through education, right? That comes through watching your mentors actually model for you what that looks like. And not only what that looks like, active listening and reflecting. That's another skill too. How do we reflect on what was said? How do we reiterate what was said to us and really acknowledge that they were heard? And how do we join with them in what they're saying, so that we in the end are gaining the information that we need through the assessment process? Because if we're not listening, if we're not regurgitating back to them what we heard, what they said, we're not going to get the information that we need in order to assess the behaviors properly, and then come up with a treatment plan that they're going to accept. So we also have to learn how to communicate what the problems are that you're seeing, and really know who's going to be part of that assessment process and the treatment. So that all comes in education and training.
Yeah.
Now, would you say that if I had to, so I'm a new behavior analyst, I'm trying to be aware of, my own culture, how that relates to other cultures, and I need to learn, one new thing this week to work with my clients. Would you say that it would be better for me to know more about a specific culture and then presume that will therefore tell me what I need to know to work with this family, or to learn, I just need to listen, even if I have no idea about this family's background and culture? If I listen, I'm going to be better off. Like, which one of those two, should I be putting my efforts in? That the active listening, or the education about specific things I should know about that culture?
So I'm so glad you asked that, because oftentimes, when I have supervisees, the first thing that they do is they go online, they Google ethnic background or culture, and they just assume that everyone within that culture is the same, right? Has the same, again, history, social dynamics, beliefs, so on and so forth. It's not true. Right. It's not true. No. It's not true.
I memorized the list of people from this area's culture. Therefore, I'm ready for cultural competence. That's not it. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Absolutely not. Do you remember that I started this conversation by saying that every culture has a subculture? Remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I'm talking about here. We all have, even within our own families, we have subcultures. Please. My family's from Colombia. Okay. Colombia, the country. And my father's from Bogota, and my mom's from Medellin. And there's all different dialects. Keep that in mind, right? Across South America, there's all different types of dialects, all different ways of communicating. Careful about the gestures, and the eyes and how you're going to look at people.
Yeah.
So my family is from a part of my dad's side of the family is from a tribe in the Andes Mountains. When folks hear me speak Spanish, they immediately say, if they're familiar with Colombian, right? Colombia and the culture, they immediately go to, oh, you know what? You're Paisa. You're from Medellin. And I look at them, I'm like, what's going on here? And they make all these stereotypes, right? As to like who I am as a person, what my beliefs are, and how much power they think I have, right? Because that's the mindset that they have of folks that grew up in that area of Colombia, right?
Sure.
You know, they have all these stereotypes. And what they don't know is, yeah, I may have that accent and that dialect. Yes, my whole family's from Colombia, but you know what? It's totally different because I grew up, we embraced, you know, the area of Bogota and San Andres, and we're totally from, like, I have so much information about the tribe that we came from, and that's who I am, and those beliefs were birthed from the experiences that I have, not necessarily my accent, right? So no, you should not, it doesn't hurt, okay? It doesn't hurt to go on Google and look up a culture, but you never should assume anything, okay? You walk into that family's home, and again, there must be that active listening, right? There must, and I'm going to say it, right? Shut up and listen, okay? There's that active listening, and there's that cultural humility that you must show, and that has to be within, right? And that comes again by being open and saying, I'm going to raise self-awareness here, okay? I'm going to say, I don't know everything. You tell me. And then I will offer and translate behavioral technology into something that you will understand and will accept. And there's going to be buy-in, and this is going to be wonderful, right? Because you're going to see that this is going to work, but it's because I stopped and listened, and you taught me about your culture.
Yeah.
Okay. So if there's anything that anyone needs to learn and take away from education and training, it's the going in there, don't make assumptions, and learn, right? Learn. It's okay to Google, right? Different cultures, but never use that and say, it's not a sort of cookie cutter, this is exactly what you're going to get, because it's not.
I love that. And I think sometimes people can feel self-conscious if they're going into a situation and they don't know a lot about someone's culture. So rather than asking questions, they might just try to sort of glean answers, right, from what they are seeing from the family. But most families would welcome those questions if they're if the person you're working with doesn't know a lot about the culture, because you want to be able to share what those really important aspects of your family life are. So it's okay to ask.
So it's okay. It's totally okay to ask. What I'm going to say is, oftentimes I see people immediately judge.
Yeah.
Okay. They go straight to, I was open. I heard, I listened. I did what you, but there were a couple things that was said where I was kind of like, oh boy, what's going on here? Right. And that's where I say it's your responsibility to find someone, find a mentor, find a your supervisor who can help navigate through this.
Yeah.
Or it may be your responsibility too to refer out.
Yep.
And that's okay. That's okay, because then I can say, okay, because you were raising self-awareness, because you were aware of your own biases and your own beliefs and what you were going down, which was a slippery slope of judging somebody, right? And making assumptions, you were responsible, and you then referred out. If you did not go through that process, you wouldn't be referring out. You'd probably stick to it and say, well, no, I'm going to make sure that this family is, going to do what I'm going to ask them to do, and I'm going to bring them into my culture. That's not what we want to do, right?
No, right, exactly. And I think this ties in so nicely to the beginning of the Fong and Tanaka article, where they break down what our ethical responsibilities are as behavior analysts with regard to cultural competence. So I wanted to make sure we touched on those, if that's okay. They talk, first of all, about exactly what you're saying here, which is that we need to generally be competent in our provision of services as behavior analysts, and that includes providing services within the bounds of our competence. And if we can't do that, then we need to study and train in new areas in order to be competent. And if we can't do that, then we do need to refer out, exactly as you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
The other area that they touched on was maintaining professional and scientific relationships. We need to ensure that we're providing services in language that's understandable to our recipient, and that can be related to speaking multiple languages, but also translating what we're saying behavior analytically for any family into language that they feel comfortable with and that they understand. Because no matter what culture someone's coming from, it's probably not behavior analysis graduate program culture, right?
Right.
And it can be easy to want to show off your new language skills that you have as a behavior analyst, but that's not helpful to families. That's can be really off-putting to them and make them, much more wary and unsure of what the actual treatment is that we're trying to provide to them and their child. So translating those services into language that's understandable is a key component of maintaining those professional relationships. Like I said, if there are cultural differences that are going to potentially affect your behavior analytic work, then get training in those areas. The final two areas aren't specific necessarily to working with one particular culture, but across the board, we cannot discriminate as behavior analysts based on age, race, gender, background, etc. We cannot knowingly engage in harassing or demeaning behavior. So I thought that was nice that they just laid those out there for us as far as our ethical standards and then thought about how those would apply to these populations.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to one of the points that Fong and Tanaka state as far as like one of their standards, which is the language barrier. We know that within countries and communities and even within, the United States and our different states, there can be different dialects of any really spoken language, right? Tone can be interpreted a certain way. Voice volume could be interpreted a certain way. People think my family's yelling at each other and we're fighting all the time, but that's not true at all. But from an outsider, somebody who's from a different culture may see it as such. Or our gestures. I was talking about, your eye movements and your raising your eye, your eyebrows and just making different facial expressions could mean different things to different cultures.
Yeah.
And eye contact is huge too. It may be a sign of disrespect, if you give somebody eye contact during an interaction. I mean, those are all things and nuances we have to learn, avoid and really be aware of and know how that's going to impact. Again, making sure that it's our responsibility, right, to find somebody that can help us with those differences in language and navigate through those language barriers. The other thing that I think I want to make very clear, too, is sometimes we make this mistake, or I see this mistake done, is let's say someone knows how to speak Italian, right? And, they know how to speak Italian pretty well. They go to a Hispanic home where they speak Spanish and, they start to say, well, Italian is similar to Spanish or Portuguese is the same thing as Spanish. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to attempt, right? I'm sorry, but Italian does not equal Spanish.
Right.
Spanish does not equal Portuguese. Different languages, right? So get the right people to translate for you. Mm-hmm. Get the right people to translate for you. And the best thing you could do, if you find a translator or if you're the one who's translating, in my case, I'm usually the one translating, be sensitive, when identifying, the different dialects because dialects matter. Find support within your state. So in the state of Connecticut where I reside, there are different programs, where translators are certified at different levels in the state to translate for all different languages. Mm. And in some cases, you may actually need to refer and say, we can't find a translator. There's limited resources. They're coming from 2 hours away every time, we have a visit, and we have a visit almost every day. Right. So you may need to refer to someone who actually speaks that language so that you're not delaying service. Mm-hmm. Okay. You're not delaying service. That's a big deal, right? Yeah. For any child and for any family. And the other thing is, you had mentioned too, behavioral technology can be complex. So we want to be careful not to inappropriately translate or communicate this information because it could be risky business. If we're not communicating adequately, accurately, we can be harming people, mm-hmm. right? We can actually be causing harm. We can be inadvertently or, not intentionally advising people to implement behavioral strategies in an inappropriate manner. Or we may be describing behavioral treatment in a way that it's going to be interpreted a different way and not implemented the way we intended it to be.
That can happen easily.
Yeah. I mean, that in itself presents an ethical dilemma, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are we going to do about that situation? So we don't have to panic about these things either, because we're talking about a lot here. We don't have to panic. We just have to find the resources, within our community, and our resources, those that are available for language barriers and navigating through that, and finding mentors, supervisors, training programs that we can learn from.
Now, what do you think as a supervisor? I know you mentioned sort of modeling just good listening behavior. Are there other pieces, I think, of supervision that you would say to any supervisor who wants to be, good at modeling to his or her students, components that they should be showing, they should be sharing, they should be more aware of in terms of cultural competence?
I go back to the awareness piece, right? Just pay attention to people's responses, your families, the families that you're working with, because even if they're not saying words, right? Even if their spoken language is not actually occurring during a meeting, but you can read a lot through facial expressions. You could read a lot through body language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And as a supervisor, I have told my supervisees that sometimes I have to match, right? So if they're looking like this is a really sad moment for them, I'm going to be where the client is at, right? I'm going to join them. I'm going to join them, and I'm going to be where the client's at, and I'm going to match, right, how they may be feeling, and I'm going to stop and just stop talking, like just don't talk, right? And allow for a silent moment.
Yep.
As behavior analysts, we're super good. We're like superstars at like going in, finding what the problem is, knowing what to do about the problem, and then making all these recommendations because we're going to save the world, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes there just needs to be silence.
Absolutely.
And you need to pay attention to what is happening, because trust me when I tell you that you will know a lot from just someone's facial expressions or body language and what their family is basically, telling you through that. That's something that I would probably advise supervisors to do.
I think that's a great piece of advice. And I love that, you're coming from this from both as a behavior analyst and as a social worker as well. And I have to say, I worked in early intervention for a long time, and I learned so much from the social workers that would join me on those cases and seeing how they were working with these families in these really acute, raw periods of time, and how they would address some of the emotional challenges that they were facing just taught me a lot. And active listening and pausing and acknowledging what the family's experiencing is really critical to establishing that rapport and helping them through this time. And that's true regardless of cultural background. I think that that's just great advice that you're throwing out there. So.
All right. I just want to make sure that we stop and take a little break before we get back to our conversation on cultural competence. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
to continue this exciting conversation about cultural competence with Dr. Solandy Forte.
Another piece that I want to sort of go into is, we've been talking about building this client-clinician relationship, right? We've been talking about listening, being aware, but there's also sometimes the slippery slope that people sort of find themselves in going down when they're like, well, I'm from the same culture, we know how to relate with each other. And now all of a sudden we don't have well-established professional boundaries,
Gotcha.
right?
Oh,
We've gotten too comfortable. That is a problem too. Even though I may relate to a certain culture, it does not mean that now I can engage in behavior or end up, joining in different sort of celebrations or events. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, going to a kid's baptism and communion and birthday parties and, a wedding. No. It's just because you're from the same culture, just because you have now embraced, or maybe not, maybe a different culture, right? But you have now, it does not mean that that you can't establish or maintain good, healthy professional boundaries. Okay.
Great point.
Because that is a trap. Because I'm sitting here saying, okay, we have to build that relationship. I'm not saying we have to build that relationship and abandon establishing boundaries. I'm saying build that relationship, but also establish those professional boundaries, because we want to avoid any multiple relationships, really. That could be a problem. Or, we know that we can't accept gifts. Is that going to be something that you're tempted to do because you've sort of gone down that slippery slope? And what ends up happening is really you're not really focusing on the task that you're there for, which is the assessment and the treatment of an individual and their family system.
Yep.
So you have to keep that in check as well.
I like that idea. Yeah, the slippery slope. I think it was the Young-Pelton article where they sort of defined slippery slope. As a sort of successive approximation of increasingly unethical behavior. And I could see, especially with individuals who the idea of cultural competence is still new. When you have a family and you're trying so hard to listen and you're picking up on some differences and you're trying to make sure that you're using language that's understandable and you're picking up on, the way, maybe the family, I think the Tanaka article mentioned, panic or functional analysis, that means something very different in Japanese culture than it does in sort of, typical Western culture.
Panic versus tantrum.
Yeah. And you're just so excited that you're doing all this that you just kind of go overboard and you sort of get too involved with becoming a member of the family rather than remembering, yes, those boundaries need to still exist. And while you should be proud of yourself, hey, you're doing a good job as a behavior analyst, you're acting ethically, that doesn't mean to start forgetting some of your other ethical obligations as well.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Good point.
And it's tempting, right? Because you feel really good. You have that moment where you're like, yes, I did it. I connected. Oops.
Too much.
Well, it is one of those sort of like, one world, like happy moments of like, wow, I finally understand it all. I'm in it now. I have this level of understanding of myself and of others, and it's okay that we're, have difference and these power differentials there, and we're going to overcome them. And yeah, you could sort of go off a cliff with sort of getting a little too into that idea as opposed to, wait, I got to back it up. What was I here for again? What's the job? How am I helping this family?
Yeah.
Exactly. You always have to keep that in check, and you got to remind yourself. So, we do have an obligation. And if you think about it, that really ultimately, who is it affecting? It's affecting the client. It's affecting his family system, right? Mm-hmm. Because you lose confidence too, right? So if something were to come up as an issue, are you then likely to bring it up as an issue? Mm-hmm. Right. So you're putting yourself in a situation where you're not as confident really pointing out what some of the problems are. For example, like in parent training, are you now, because you've established this dual relationship, because you tried so hard really to build a relationship with this family. Now you have a dual relationship just because you attended a birthday party or, attended a family event. are you as likely to point out, when they're not implementing the plan or when they've done something that is completely opposite to what you have advised them to do? Mm-hmm. And really, who's that disservice? You're doing a disservice to the family.
Right. Yeah.
So,
and that's why we have those ethical guidelines in place, is to guide us in that way. But it can be easy to get off track.
Mm-hmm. I have a more specific kind of example that I think kind of gets into the idea of the cultural competence as well, as in addition to the idea of when do you refer out. I think one of the questions that comes up, and I see it in a lot of articles about cultural competence, is when your recommendations as a behavior analyst come into conflict with the cultural norms or the cultural beliefs of the individuals or the clients that you are working with. I think co-sleeping comes up a lot as sort of the go-to example of parents are complaining about challenges with sleep. Okay, well, I know how to handle that, or I know how I would handle that in my own culture, but they are from a culture that believes strongly in co-sleeping, and yikes, half of my recommendations have to do with you need a different sleep hygiene, you need to be in your own bed. Is this an issue where it's an insurmountable conflict? Is it one where it would be appropriate for me to discuss my, not my concerns, but my, I guess no concerns, or the fact that it might be a barrier?
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to even push it even a little further. It's not you just discussing, right? Mm-hmm. In some cases, it may be behavior analysts imposing, imposing, right? Because they think it's a problem. So
that's the important piece.
And that's the important piece, is that the behavior analyst is seeing it as a problem, but the family's not seeing it as a problem. So really the ultimate question is where's the social significance there? Mm-hmm. And is this a behavior that really needs to be targeted? Or is it because you see that as a problem? Mm-hmm. And that is something that's happened to me as well. I was in a meeting with a family and the behavior analyst, because during the assessment process, so we were not even there for sleeping. We were there for other behaviors of concern. That's the reason why we were called, right?
Yeah.
And the behavior analyst has a whole protocol on getting the kid out of the parent's bed. Mm. And I'm like, and the mom is like, she's looking, she's like, and you know what happened to the mom? The mom felt like, and you should see it, you saw it all over her face, like, I'm a horrible person. Aww. I'm a horrible parent. Mm-hmm. And then she looked at me because I was the one translating. She said, have I been doing something wrong? Have I been doing damage? Is this why my child behaves the way he's behaving? Is this why he has autism? What, what am I? And she just sort of like, totally just fell, she just melted, she was just like, I can't, just completely had a struggle with thinking that she had done something terribly wrong.
Yeah.
For, I don't know, 5 years. Mm-hmm. And I had to stop and I explained, cause I was a supervisor at the time. I looked at the clinician. I said, you have this protocol. I need to take a moment right now and translate for mom what your idea was with this protocol. But I also need to tell you that she doesn't necessarily feel that this is a problem. She's asking you if it is a problem. Mm. And we need to have an open conversation about this. Afterwards, obviously, I spoke to the behavior analyst about this not necessarily being a problem, right? Because in here in the United States, we're the only culture really that doesn't co-sleep. Everywhere else, it's done.
Yeah.
And those who do it in the United States and don't say anything, they're just hiding it. I hid it. Hey, I didn't tell anybody.
It's a personal choice unless it's presenting a problem for the family. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Right? Unless nobody's getting sleep. And then it's time to do something. But otherwise, it's a personal family choice. That's how I see it.
It with that case. Now we have so that's personal family choice.
Yeah.
But then we have the case where it is a problem. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's say, and it is harmful. So you've done your assessment. You've been called for, concerns for certain behaviors, and part of the problem for, addressing this, you have to identify that issue is a problem. Okay. And that family's saying, no, it's not, it has nothing to do with it. And you're saying, but it does. And let's help us sort of have the conversation around how we can arrive at understanding why it is a problem. Mm-hmm. And those cases sometimes, the problem is that somebody can get hurt. There's potential harm, And that is not a conversation that you can ignore. You know, that's not a conversation that you can't have. That's not a conversation that, you know, you say, well, you know, we can have it, you know, next week. No, that's a conversation that we have to have now, today. And let's hope that we can arrive at an understanding and acceptance of some of your recommendations, right? Maybe not all of them right away, but maybe we can get there partially.
I agree. And some of that too is we have to put forward that this could be of concern, right? That's our responsibility is to bring it up.
It's our responsibility.
But taking like a really hard my way or the highway approach may not be what's ultimately most beneficial for that family. Because if they're going to lose their behavior analytic services entirely because we've created this rift in their relationship, then that's not helpful for them either. So there may be some incremental processes that need to happen in order to get the family a little bit closer to understanding why this is important and the types of small changes initially that we could make to move them there. And we're better off seeing it as these gradations of gray versus black and white.
And I think that takes us sort of back almost to where we began. You know, on the one hand, if you have no cultural competence, you'll just come in and say, you're complaining about, you know, family, you're complaining about this is a problem. Well, this is what's wrong, and this is how you're going to fix it. You can be very blunt about it. And then I think as you start to understand more about cultural competence, you're aware, okay, well, this might be a problem, but are there cultural boundaries that it's inappropriate for me to impose my own thoughts on? And then you could come back around to a situation where, well, I may sort of be imposing my own culture on it, but if this is becoming a dangerous problem, I may need to do so? Or is it more just a matter of, these are just the variables that I'm taking into account?
But you shouldn't be coming at it from, this is my culture. At that point, you're just looking at, this is behavior.
This is behavior.
Behavior is behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I am here because there's a problem.
Yeah.
You have identified this problem. I am telling you, right? And we're going to get there, but I have discovered that the problem has to do with A, B, and C. And I know that's going to be really difficult for you to hear because your culture really impacts A, B, and C and how you're treating the situation. Okay. So we need to arrive at that. And again, that is because of my responsibility. It's not something that I can ignore at all. And we need to work through this. And sometimes I have to, call for extra support. Sometimes I have to call the Department of Children and Families. Sometimes I have to call the educational department just to help with this process.
Yeah, this is heavy stuff. And if you're a behavior analyst operating in these areas and you feel like you're out of your depth, then you need to call in assistance. And that's a good thing to do.
Well, I could see that definitely being a problem, say, with a situation where a child is dangerously underweight and you're identifying that some of the issues maintaining that relate to, say, dietary preferences, feeding practices. That is a case I don't want to.
But you just brought up a wonderful one, right? We have some kids with autism who they themselves, right, restrict and have limited foods that they will have, right? And let's say a part of a family is like, no, we cook these foods and this is what we offer and what we offer today is what you eat. And if you don't eat it, you don't eat. So you brought up a good one, right? They call me and say, okay, I'm having a feeding issue. Come and help me. And we realize that they're not really being offered many other choices. We need to tackle that together. And that is something that I may or may not bring in, other resources for help. That really is each individual case that we have to treat, and try to figure out what are the next steps for that. Even kids who are overweight, kids who, there's so many spanking. I mean, that's a real thing. It happens. There are some cultures where spanking happens. That's something that we have to deal, and it's hard conversations to have, but ones that we have to have.
Yeah. So these articles bring up some really great examples, such as sleeping, feeding, a variety of differences in religious observances.
The vocabulary one was one I never thought of. I'm very much of like, oh, like functional analysis. Functional analysis is a behavioral term. And then the idea that no, but some cultures might see functional analysis as having to do with mathematics. It's like, oh, okay, well.
Yeah. Behavior analysis does not necessarily translate perfectly into other languages. It really doesn't. And you're absolutely right with the functional analysis, but there's a reinforcement. We know reinforcement, right? What reinforcement is. In Spanish, if we were to, put it in Google, let's say, right, it's going to come up with reforzar, which is reinforcement, which is like if I have a broken leg on a chair, I need some reinforcement.
Like, let's add some extra nails and hammer that in.
Get me some tape, In my case, get me some tape. Forget about the nails.
I used to name objective discrimination, talking about matching, and I had to change that because families thought that we were teaching children to discriminate like against other people. Right? And they're like, I don't want my child to.
What kind of fascist school are you running over? I was like,
oh my gosh,
here?
no. Yeah. So now it's learning to learn. That's what I call it.
Oh, that's a guy like that.
Yeah, learning to learn.
That feels like it would translate
right?
pretty well, I think.
Sure, you type it in Google, and that is what you get. And oh my gosh, obviously would never be my intention. So those types of things you really have to think carefully about.
I will also say that behavior analysis is not it's not a sexy language either,
Yeah.
So it's one that doesn't translate easy, right? And it's not very attractive when it's then translated, so we have to be careful.
Now, I know in some of the articles, the discussion came up of how do you continue getting education in your own cultural competence? And certainly the idea of if you have a big enough organization, perhaps you want someone who's like the cultural competence coordinator. I'm guessing most people are not going to find themselves in a situation where that is going to be a role that anyone is serving and sort of just coming to them with, hey, everybody, here's the latest in research related to cultural competence. What recommendations would you have for behavior analysts who, want to stay up on, increasing their education on this topic? Is it a matter of just knowing lots of diverse behavior analysts? Is it a matter of there's research they should be looking at beyond sort of, the citations that we have for this episode? What are some of your thoughts?
So in a lot of organizations, there aren't many opportunities for individuals to be brought in to be sort of like the multicultural expert, right? And there isn't anyone that is a multicultural expert per se, but where I currently work, Milestones Behavioral Services in Connecticut, we are establishing a multicultural outreach program. I'm leading that initiative because we do have a strong Hispanic community, but it can't just be done by one person. Okay? Yeah. So I have to survey and hopefully come up with a pool of individuals within my organization. We have about 210 staff. So within my organization that would be willing to help with building, right, promoting cultural competence, but also making behavior analysis available to our community. So with the multicultural community outreach program that we have established, really, it's the first step towards that goal. And really, the first step is reaching out to your organization and saying, who speaks a different language and who would be willing to participate in really advocating for these families to have access to our services and knowledge about applied behavior analysis. And I think really that's the first step. And I think any organization can do it. I know that resources are tough, especially for newer agencies. Yeah. It's tough. It's tough when they can't necessarily dedicate one person to do it, but it should be an initiative and it should be a goal, within an organization's like vision, 3 years, 5 years out, where are we going to be 20 years out? So it is important. And in my organization, I mean, I've learned that there are individuals who speak German, speak Polish, and who are willing to join, this task force really and offering these different opportunities for families that wouldn't otherwise have access to them. And also just because we have, Spanish, German, and Polish, let's say in my organization, that we know of languages and people that are willing to help, that doesn't mean that's what the need is in your community. So that's the other thing, right? So you have to also know your community and know right now in New Haven and Bridgeport area that we work in, we know that Spanish is huge and heavy, but we also know that there's a strong community, an Indian community. There's a strong West Indies community. I mean, we have to, right? So we have to be aware of that too. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I feel like it's definitely doable. I mean, I'm doing it with my colleagues now, and we're pushing full force with this initiative, and we're super excited about it because it's something that we know that there's a need for, and hoping that we can have an impact.
I think that's awesome. In any organization, I think just by opening up this conversation amongst the people that work there, that can in and of itself bring more a level of cultural awareness and competence into that organization by making sure that anytime you're meeting with your supervisees or you're meeting as a group or in a training context, that you're bringing in these aspects and just threading it through all the different things that you're discussing and making it okay to bring up these issues and talk about how they should best be addressed. And that doesn't take any extra money. It's just taking a little bit of time and thinking about it. One of these articles, it was the Fong et al. 2006 article. They brought up a couple, they're just little questionnaires, but people can do them online. And one's called the Diversity Self-Assessment. And then the other one I had taken previously is called How Do You Relate to Various Groups of People in Society? Assessment. I encourage everyone out there listening to take it. You can just Google it. How do you relate to various groups of people in society? And it was made a long time ago, too. It was back in the 70s. But I really liked it, and I felt like I learned some about myself as well, because it breaks down things into potential biases, not just for ethnic or racial potential bias, but other groups as well. And I think it's good to kind of think about this topic in the broader context. So it was also checking to see if you have potential bias related to individuals with social issues, different religious backgrounds, physical or mental handicaps, and varying political points of view. And there were questions related to, like, how would you feel about someone who was recently released from prison? Or people of different sexual orientation. So like those types of questions as well, because, we work with everyone from all walks of life. And I think it's good to recognize where you might have potential bias just beyond thinking about different racial or ethnic groups too.
That might come into, I think, paying attention to what's your own culture. Because I know if all I think about is like, oh, me, I'm a white male. If that's all I ever think about, therefore the only things I need to think about are what sex is the client I'm working with and what general, race are they, that really does miss out on all those, like you were talking about, Solandy, the subcultures, what, is it religion? What's your financial background? What's, your sexual orientation? Where, not just what culture are you because you identify with the, one of 6 boxes on the the ethnic checklist, but what are the subcultures within that? From what part of the world are you from? I think it definitely broadens that horizon of there's a lot more to it than just sort of, the big one or two kind of what are the two differences between people, and that's all I'll pay attention to. It's too complicated.
I mean, it should make sense to us as behavior analysts to talk about behavior in this way, right? Because we work generally with operant behavior, but there's also the level of cultural selection that's always happening. So all of us are a product of our own personal history, but also the cultural history that we've been experiencing. And that makes us all unique. Rainbow.
It's us.
So Solandy, we usually do a section at the end of the show, dissemination station, where we sort of do a kind of a summary of what we discussed. Usually Jackie makes a fun sound effect, but as she is sick, it would not sound like a train. Thank you. Thank you, Diana. So I wanted to start off this way. I'm going to kind of throw out some, not my personal statements that I'm making, but some statements that I feel like I've either heard or, that I've maybe had at some point in my career. And then I'd like to sort of hear, what would your response to those statements be? And my first one is going to be, I work in a predominantly white suburban area. Therefore, I don't need to talk about cultural competence. It's not important to me. If it comes up, I'll Google something about, that other group. What would you say to that person?
Well, it probably would start off with more of trying to control my facial expression, taking a deep breath, and then really taking a moment and saying, even within a predominantly white, right, affluent community, there are, again, differences as to how we all are going to receive the news from an individual who has been diagnosed with some sort of disability. So even though we need to difference in languages is not going to be an issue, differences in ethnicities is going to be an issue, but we also need to understand that there are different cultures within even the white community, because everyone's going to respond differently to receiving the news of a child diagnosed with a disability for the first time.
Yeah.
And we need to understand how they're going to respond to the situation that is in their hands right now, and how responsive they're going to be to our treatment. Really, it's understanding who they are as, their family system as a culture, because even within that huge community that we're talking about that we serve here, there is that small subculture within that small family unit. That's how I would probably respond, really.
It all comes back to that cultural humility idea,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, you don't know what that other family is like or what they've experienced in their past or what they're going through. You got to find that stuff out.
Okay, here's my next one. I am so ready for cultural competence, but I think I'm going to screw it up, and I'm going to make people not want behavior analytic services from me. I don't know what to do. I'm paralyzed with fear. Maybe I shouldn't even bother.
No worries. You and I are going to go in together. You are going to shadow me. You are going to learn through modeling, and we are going to empower this family to join us in the assessment process and implementation of treatment. That's how I would probably take this situation. If it's a supervisee who's really nervous and they've learned a lot, but they feel like they're going to mess something up, then really what we need to do is lift them up so that they can see in action and really embrace what's happening. Because if they're feeling that way, then they haven't really received adequate training around it. And that's something that's I'm responsible for as a supervisor. So.
All right. Those are my two main kind of running the gamut of the I'm not going to do it to the I want to and don't know how. I think, and I don't want to say unfortunately, but I think in terms of where we as a field are in terms of cultural competence, I would guess the majority of people are in sort of the latter camp of I want to do it, I just don't know how. Hopefully there are very few, though I would have to guess there'll be some. I don't really want to do it, or it's not really important to me, so I'm not going to focus on it.
I think it can be intimidating to attempt to, get it all right, right? And I'm a member of different online communities, and some of them are very culturally competent and very aware, and the language surrounding what is okay to say and not okay changes daily, and trying to keep up, and I hardly ever write anything online because I don't want to be chastised for using the language of yesterday today, right? But I think part of if you come into those situations prepared to be a little bit wrong, but learn from it and change your behavior to the better moving forward, then usually the people who are in the know are accepting of that, and they see that you're trying. And I think that really the underlying point there is the humility piece, right? So apologizing if you don't get it right, and trying to do your best, and never assuming that the point that you're coming from is the correct point of view.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's okay. I've had maybe once and twice close but changed her mind where a behavior analyst said to me, I just can't. I have tried. I have listened. I've been open as much as I can be, but I can't move forward with it. And I have accepted that and said, not a problem.
Yeah.
I applaud you in this moment for communicating that so that we can then refer, we can find somebody else to actually, do the work that we've been asked to do. And I applaud you for not delaying that. So there have been moments, not many. I could just remember one explicitly, and the other one who started to say that. And then I said, well, how would you feel if I came with you? And this was a moment where we can share together and we can walk through the whole process. And then she embraced it and she loved it, but she was terrified at first.
Yeah.
So it's okay. It's okay. It's part of our responsibility, right? To say and admit when we're not capable of doing something right now in this moment.
Mm-hmm. All right, here I am just with one more little interruption. I want to make sure that everyone gets that second secret code word, and it is COCOA. COCOA. Yes, if you are living in the United States, especially if you're up in the New England area or kind of anywhere that gets snow, it's getting a bit chilly and a bit snowy, and perhaps it's time to have a little cup of hot cocoa. Cocoa. Well, Solandy, thank you so very, very much for taking the time to talk with us about this very important issue that I know for me, I think I've moved much farther than I used to be as a professional, but I'm probably still at that whole, I'm ready to give it a try, but I have that trepidation of I'm just going to screw everything up. So it's always nice to have it, have that, that bonus of it's okay. It's okay to screw up. Everybody does it, keep trying and have that cultural humility and understanding, and it will hopefully all kind of work out, at least to start. So I do appreciate that the words of encouragement you've shared and guidance as well.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Would you do you have a contact information you'd be comfortable sharing with listeners if they had more questions or they wanted to contact you on cultural competence or even specifically to talk to about your own experiences?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm right now at Milestones Behavioral Services, Director of Consultation and Community Outreach. And my contact is S as in Sam, F as in Forte, so SFORTE at mbs-inc.org. The other thing I could direct you to is www.mbs-inc.org. So that's our website.
Excellent.
Great.
We want to once again thank Dr. Solandy Forte for taking the time to talk with us all about cultural competence. I also want to make sure to thank Diana.
You bet.
And, of course, Jackie, who, again, could not be here due to illness, but is here in spirit. I hope you enjoyed, or we all hope you enjoyed ABA Inside Track. We are a weekly podcast. If you did, please think kindly of us and maybe subscribe on, say, Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also feel free to leave us a review either there or on our Facebook page. You can also send us messages through Twitter or Instagram or at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. And as always, you can go to the website at www.abainsidetrack.com or go to our YouTube page to listen to our weekly episodes. Well, that about wraps it up for all of us here at ABA Inside Track. Thanks again so much for listening. We'll be back next week with a preview of our next exciting topic. But until then, keep responding. Bye!